She shot your wife because of a railing? That's what you're telling me? The neighbor's stunned whisper cut through the sirens, the flashing blue light trembling against the houses, as if the entire street was holding its breath. The medic's hands were already pressing into the wound, Iris fighting to stay conscious. And somewhere behind the chaos, the woman who fired the shot kept repeating, "It was an accident. It was an accident," as if words could erase the bullet she'd unleashed. The HOA president who lorded over parking spaces and hedge heights had finally gone too far. Yet, in the seconds that followed, the real horror wasn't just the gunfire. It was the realization that everyone around her seemed more afraid of her authority than of the truth bleeding out on the pavement. By the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. No one noticed the quiet man kneeling beside his wife, steadying her head with hands that did not shake. No one questioned why the paramedic deferred to him when he spoke, and no one yet understood the reversal that was coming, because the soft-spoken maintenance worker they dismissed had survived far worse than a tyrant with a clipboard. Before I show you the exact moment he realized this wasn't just a shooting, but an ambush built on power and arrogance. This story isn't about an HOA. It's about what happens when the wrong man's family is targeted. Contrarian snapback. While everyone focused on the screaming, the blood, and the excuses spilling from the HOA president's trembling mouth, he simply rose to his feet. Calm, grounded, unmoving in a way that made even the officers glance twice. He didn't shout, didn't threaten, didn't break. He'd learned long ago that rage was loud, but precision was quiet. He watched them take Iris into the ambulance, her hands slipping from his fingers as they lifted her stretcher. His daughter stood frozen on the curb, small and shaking, clutching the stuffed fox she never left behind. He picked her up, held her close, and felt her tiny heartbeat thudding against his chest. That, more than the gunshot, more than the lights, was the sound that reignited something buried inside him. He looked across the street at the woman, still insisting she feared for her safety. The same woman who had spent months harassing them with fines over fictional violations, wielding the HOA bylaws like weapons. Tonight she'd escalated, crossing a line she could never retreat from. And even now, she tried to twist the scene into her favor. Officers nodded, neighbors murmured, board members hovered close to her like a shield. They all acted as if her authority still meant something. He knew better. As they loaded Iris into the ambulance, he caught the briefest glimpse of her eyes, pained, apologetic, terrified not of dying, but of leaving him alone with what came next. He squeezed her hand once before the doors shut. That single gesture said everything. It reminded him who he used to be, who he still was beneath the uniform, the tools, the quiet life he'd chosen when May was born. He'd buried his past, but it had never left him. It lived in muscle memory, in instincts sharpened by years of high-risk engineering assignments, in a mind trained to assess threats and respond with exact, controlled action. None of these people knew, none of them imagined. To them, he was the guy who tightened bolts on playgrounds and replaced streetlights. No one questioned how he moved during crises, why he understood medical protocols, why his voice held authority when others panicked. They would learn soon. For now, he stood with his daughter in his arms, the night buzzing with voices trying to shape a narrative he refused to accept. A detective approached, scribbling notes, eyes flicking toward the HOA president as though waiting for her permission to proceed. That was when he understood the war ahead would not be fought on the street. It would be buried in hearings, reports, manufactured violations, and political pressure. They weren't just going to defend her, they were going to bury him. He tightened his hold on May, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "She's going to be okay," he said, not as wishful thinking, but as a promise forged from the part of him no one here had ever seen. And as the ambulance pulled away, as Lorraine Datchwell dabbed fake tears and whispered rehearsed lines to her board, he made another promise, one to himself. They would not get away with this. Not with their lies, not with their power, not with the illusion that he was someone they could intimidate or silence. He'd dismantle every piece of the machine they hid behind, not through chaos, not through rage, but with the same precision he once used to neutralize threats in environments far more dangerous than a suburban cul-de-sac. Tonight, they took their first shot. They had no idea he'd already begun calculating his response. He stayed on the curb long after the ambulance disappeared, May still wrapped around him like she was afraid he might vanish too. The officers milled around, gathering statements, whispering among themselves and glancing toward the HOA president as if waiting for direction. That detail didn't slip past him. Nothing did. Not the way Lorraine Datchwell paced in controlled circles. Not the board members hovering close enough to shield her. Not the immediate attempts at narrative control. It all settled in his mind as cleanly as pieces sliding into a pattern he'd seen before. Powerful people fabricating truth before the truth could speak for itself. He walked May inside, locking the door behind them. The house still carried Iris's presence, her jacket on the chair, the mug she'd been using, the faint lavender scent she loved. He set May on the couch, crouching in front of her. Her eyes were red, swollen, and frightened, but she didn't cry. She watched him, with the same quiet intensity he'd seen in her since she was old enough to speak. "Is Mom really going to be okay?" she whispered. "Yes," he said softly, "and I'm going to take care of everything until she's back home." The steady tone wasn't for himself. It was for her. She needed stability, something predictable, something solid. He'd learned during deployments that fear was contagious, but so was composure, and he couldn't afford to let fear win, not tonight. When May finally fell asleep curled against him, he carried her to her bed and tucked her in with her stuffed fox. Only after she drifted into restless sleep did he return to the living room, sit at the table, and open the drawer where he kept a small metal case. Inside lay a few tools he hadn't needed in years: angled calipers, a compact digital level, a pen light, and a slim notebook with waterproof pages. Not weapons, not even close, but they represented something he hadn't used in a long time: precision. He flipped the notebook open. Page 1 remained blank, waiting. He began recording each detail from tonight: time of gunshot, angle of entry wound, distance approximations based on blood spray direction, the HOA president's exact statements, officers' positions, who spoke first, who hesitated, who deferred to her. No emotion, no conjecture, just facts. Facts would matter more than outrage when the HOA machine tried to twist everything. His handwriting remained clean, steady, almost surgical. He hadn't lost that. A knock rattled the front door. He rose, instinctively scanning the windows before approaching. When he opened the door a few inches, Ezra Marin, the HOA property assessor, stood on the porch. The guy looked torn, stress carving deep lines across his brow. He held a clipboard he clearly didn't plan on using. "I shouldn't be here," Ezra muttered, "but I saw what happened. Lorraine's already talking to the board about issuing infractions. They're saying your wife rushed her." He didn't react. "My wife was unarmed and standing still." "I know." Ezra's voice dropped to a quieter register. "But they're going to bury you under paperwork before the police finish their report. She's already calling this a self-defense incident tied to a non-compliant homeowner. They're using your old fines as leverage." He said nothing, but something changed in Ezra's expression, like he'd expected anger but found something colder, something calculating. "Look," Ezra continued, swallowing, "I've wanted to leave the board for months, but Lorraine, she has ways of ruining people, careers, reputations. She'll do anything to stay in control." That much he'd already deduced. "Why tell me this?" he asked quietly. "Because," Ezra exhaled, "this time she's gone too far, and you didn't panic, you didn't yell. You stayed calm while everyone else lost their heads." He hesitated, then added, "People like her don't know how to predict men like you." He didn't respond, but the observation wasn't wrong. "Be careful," Ezra warned. "She won't back down. She's already planning to call an emergency HOA meeting tomorrow." He nodded once and closed the door. His victory strategy began here, not with retaliation, not with rage, but with exposure, precision, documentation, the slow, methodical unraveling of power. He returned to the table and resumed writing, the lines building into a structured account. He'd faced commanders who manipulated reports, insurgents who twisted truth, bureaucrats who hid behind authority. Compared to that, an HOA president might have influence, but not real strength, and she had just made the mistake of believing her influence could override reality. Hours later, when the house grew silent, he stepped outside with a flashlight. He moved to the spot where Iris fell, scanning the ground, the angle of the porch light, the position where Lorraine had stood. He traced the bullet's trajectory, calculating direction and height, marking the ground in thin chalk lines from his pocket. Not for the police, not for the HOA, for himself, for accuracy. The truth was right there in the geometry of the scene. When he finished, he stood at the curb, staring at the HOA headquarters across the neighborhood. Its tall windows, its polished stone pillars, the structure that symbolized control. He took in its layout, its foundation lines, its elevation on the slope. He'd once been trained to read buildings like other men read books. Tonight, he began reading this one. He walked back inside, turned off the porch light, and locked the door. Tomorrow, everything would accelerate. The meetings, the lies, the intimidation. But he'd be ready. Not because he sought revenge, but because his family deserved safety, dignity, and truth. And because Lorraine Datchwell had just declared a war she was wildly unprepared to fight. He woke before dawn, long before May stirred, long before the neighborhood's curated quiet returned to its usual artificial calm. The house felt colder without Iris's presence, but he moved through it with the same measured efficiency he'd used for years, slow enough not to wake his daughter, fast enough to stay ahead of whatever Lorraine would attempt when morning came. He set a kettle on the stove, opened his notebook again, and reviewed last night's details. The chalk markings, the trajectory, the witness behaviors, each line confirmed the same unmistakable truth. The shot came from panic, not self-defense. And yet, panic didn't absolve responsibility. It only deepened it when someone tried to rewrite the aftermath. He heard May's soft footsteps behind him and turned. She carried her fox, rubbing her eyes with her free hand. "Can we see Mom today?" she whispered. "Yes," he said, keeping his voice steady. "Right after breakfast." She nodded, trusting him completely, and climbed into the chair beside him. Her presence grounded him. She was the anchor in everything he did, the reason he chose a quieter job, a quieter life, a quieter existence than the one he was trained for. But quiet never meant weak. It simply meant controlled. After dropping her off with Iris's sister for the morning, he drove toward the hospital, but halfway there his phone buzzed. A notification from the HOA portal flashed across the screen. Emergency HOA meeting. Mandatory attendance. Subject: community safety. Incident and homeowner review. He pulled over. There it was, the strike Lorraine promised. Not even 12 hours after the shooting, and she was already formalizing her version of events. Mandatory attendance meant required statements, required compliance, and a room filled with people she could manipulate. He rerouted the car. When he arrived at the HOA headquarters, a group of residents already gathered outside. Murmurs of anxiety, curiosity, confusion. Most hadn't heard the true story yet. That was by design. Lorraine moved quickly to shape narratives, and people in communities like this often believed the story told with the most confidence, not the most truth. He stepped inside. The lobby gleamed with polished floors and chandelier lighting, symbols of authority built to feel untouchable. A board member named Claudia intercepted him instantly, eyes flicking toward the clipboard in her hand. "Ah, good. We need your preliminary statement. Lorraine is very shaken. She insists she acted appropriately." He studied her face, nervous, defensive, already pre-programmed. "My wife is in the hospital," he said. "Shot by your president." Claudia stiffened but recovered quickly. "We understand how traumatic this must be for you, but Lorraine told us Iris became aggressive." He didn't raise his voice. "Iris fainted at the sight of blood. She doesn't even kill spiders." Claudia swallowed. The truth was harder to counter when spoken without anger. Before she could respond, Lorraine emerged from the conference room. Her posture was crisp, her blouse immaculate, her expression composed, an image carefully curated. Only her eyes betrayed strain. "I need to speak with him privately," she announced. He followed her down the hallway, each step measured, controlled. Inside her office, she shut the door and clasped her hands together dramatically. "I want to express how deeply sorry I am for what happened," she began, voice smooth. "But I also need you to understand, I feared for my life." Iris approached very fast. I reacted instinctively. He met her gaze, saying nothing. When silence stretched, she shifted tactics. "We can handle this internally. No need for lawsuits or public reports." If you're willing to sign a statement clarifying that it was a misunderstanding, we can waive all your outstanding fines and— There are no misunderstandings, he said quietly. You shot my wife. Her jaw tightened. If you refuse cooperation, the board will have to take measures. You've already violated several bylaws. Tonight's meeting will include a discussion about your home's compliance status. There it was. The threat. The power move. She wielded authority the way some men wielded weapons, recklessly and without accountability. He let her speak, let her feel in control, let her believe she still held the leverage. Then he asked, "Did you tell the police that you approached our property with your firearm visible?" She blinked. What does that have to do with anything?" "Everything," he said, "and the officers will draw their own conclusions after reviewing the angle of the shot, the blood pattern, the distance." Her composure cracked, just for a second, a flicker of something sharp, fearful. "How would you even know that?" she snapped. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. He left her office before she could regain control, walking back into the lobby where residents now filled the space. Their conversations grew louder, fragmented bits of speculation and rumor weaving through the air. But as he passed, several people fell silent, watching him differently now. Not with pity, not with suspicion, but with the awareness that he wasn't folding beneath the weight of the HOA's pressure. Ezra waited near the back wall, hands stuffed into his pockets. "They're preparing slides," he muttered quickly. "Trying to justify everything? Be ready." "I am," he said. Ezra nodded slowly, as if seeing something in him he hadn't noticed before. Respect. Maybe something like relief. The conference room doors opened. The board filed in. Residents followed. The meeting would begin any second. He took a seat toward the center, calm and unshakable, as the room churned with tension. This wasn't his battlefield of choice, but he'd adapt. He always did. And tonight would be the first moment the neighborhood realized the HOA wasn't nearly as powerful as it believed. The conference room lights dimmed slightly as the last residents shuffled inside, the atmosphere electric with tension. Rows of chairs faced a long, elevated table, where the HOA board arranged themselves like a tribunal. Lorraine sat at the center, posture rigid, fingers laced together as though she were holding the entire meeting in place by sheer force of will. People whispered about her bandaged wrist, the one she'd clutched dramatically while entering, already spinning her version of the story. Her eyes swept the room with calm calculation until they landed on him. He didn't look away. A murmur rippled around him, subtle but noticeable. He wasn't hunched or defeated. His shoulders were squared, his expression composed. There was no shakiness, no frantic desperation. Just stillness, controlled, precise, unsettling in its quiet certainty. It made several board members shift in their seats. The meeting began with ceremonial language about community safety and preserving harmony. But it was clear from the opening sentence that this wasn't a discussion. It was a stage crafted for Lorraine's defense. She cleared her throat, folding her hands with faux vulnerability. "Before we address tonight's scheduled agenda," she began, "I want to speak about the tragic incident that occurred yesterday." He almost admired her confidence. Almost. She recounted the shooting in rehearsed strokes, painting herself as a trembling victim, forced to confront a hostile homeowner. She emphasized her long-standing commitment to safety. She claimed Iris lunged in a moment of emotional instability. Every sentence was a brushstroke in a portrait she wanted the neighborhood to accept. When she finished, Claudia pressed a button on the remote. A slide appeared. Sequence of events, preliminary overview. Each bullet point crafted to reinforce the same lie. But something unexpected happened. People didn't nod. They frowned. They exchanged glances. Rumors had begun circulating, quietly at first, now louder, as residents questioned the severity of the gunshot versus the mildness of Lorraine's injury. They'd heard whispers about Iris's personality, her calm nature, her gentle demeanor. They'd noticed how fast this meeting was called, how prepared the slides were. Too prepared. Ezra leaned close. "They're losing them," he murmured. He didn't reply. He simply observed, calculating. Lorraine moved to the next topic. "We must now address the homeowner's compliance violations from before the incident." A hand shot up in the crowd. Mr. Tallman, a retired accountant known for his blunt honesty, stood. "Why are we talking about fines when a woman's in the hospital?" he asked flatly. Whispers erupted. Lorraine stiffened. "All matters are connected. His violations contributed to an unsafe environment." "That's enough," another resident interjected. "Explain how you brought a gun to an inspection." Her face faltered, just slightly, enough for him to notice. But instead of responding, she shifted focus. "We will continue in order. Board Member Ortiz, please review the compliance findings." Ortiz stood, papers shaking, not from fear of the residents, but fear of contradicting Lorraine. "The railing on the Harker property. It was measured last week," a woman in the front row said sharply. "I saw him fix it. It was correct." More voices joined in. People who had lived under Lorraine's rule for years were finally sensing weakness, doubt. And doubt was contagious. He waited. He needed her off balance, not silenced entirely. For truth to stand, the lies had to expose themselves first. When the murmuring grew too loud to contain, Lorraine slammed the gavel. "Enough! We cannot devolve into chaos. This board has authority, and that authority has limits," he said, rising slowly. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The room stilled anyway. "You keep referring to safety, to compliance, to protocol. But yesterday, you approached our home with your firearm already visible. Isn't that correct?" Her lips parted, barely a fraction. "Enough. That's irrelevant to the—" "It's directly relevant," he continued, "because at the distance you were standing, with your height and angle, the shot pattern doesn't match what you've described." Gasps scattered through the room. He wasn't raising accusations. He was stating facts, and facts carried their own gravity. A board member tried to intervene. "Sir, this isn't the place." "It's exactly the place," he said calmly, "because you're not just representing rules, you're representing the truth, and yesterday you allowed lies to be recorded as fact." Every person watching him now leaned forward. The quiet man they had overlooked was dismantling the narrative with surgical precision. He stepped closer to the projector. "Next slide, please." No one moved. Ezra swallowed and pressed the button. A new slide appeared. HOA headquarters. Current structural risk assessment measurements. Diagrams, photographs. The board blinked in confusion, then panic. He didn't smile. "If you're going to lecture homeowners on safety, perhaps you should ensure your own building meets code." Lorraine shot to her feet. "You had no right to—" "I had every right," he replied, eyes steady. "Because you approved illegal modifications, sloppy ones. The building is unstable, and you knew it." Chaos erupted. Shouts, questions, accusations. Ezra stared at him like he'd just watched a tectonic shift occur. But beneath the noise, beneath the unraveling authority, beneath Lorraine's rising fear, one truth rang clear. The board had lost control. His victory strategy, precision, exposure, the slow dismantling of power had just taken its first major step, and everyone in the room knew it. The room dissolved into confusion, voices overlapping, chairs scraping, residents turning on the board with a momentum that spread faster than Lorraine could contain it. She slammed the gavel repeatedly, but each strike only magnified how little authority she had left. The chandelier above rattled faintly under the force, as though even the building was responding to the tension. Several homeowners demanded answers all at once, their confidence swelling now that someone had cracked the facade she spent years constructing. He remained standing, posture controlled, hands loosely at his sides, not defensive, not confrontational, simply present in a way that commanded more attention than volume ever could. The uproar didn't rattle him. He'd once stabilized panicked squads under mortar fire. A hostile room of homeowners was nothing by comparison. Finally, the noise tapered enough for him to continue. "There's something you should all understand," he said, voice steady as a drawn line. "Those structural risks I mentioned, they're not hypothetical. They're measurable. The kind of measurements you can't dismiss with a vote or a bylaw." Several residents exchanged looks, uncertainty settling into their expressions. Lorraine stepped forward, her calm demeanor cracking. "What are you implying?" she hissed. "That our community building is dangerous? That we've willingly put residents at risk? That is slander." "It's documented," he said, lifting his notebook. Sagging load-bearing beams, reinforced sections removed without permits, electrical rerouting that violates city regulations. You can call it whatever you want, but gravity doesn't care about your titles. Ezra shifted uneasily near the back, his gaze darting between the board and the crowd. He knew the truth. He had seen the renovations up close, and for the first time, someone inside the system was openly questioning whether the structure they hid behind was about to collapse, literally and figuratively. A man in the second row raised his hand slowly. Is the building really unsafe? Yes, he answered without hesitation. And if the county reviews it, and they will, you won't be holding meetings in here anymore. Shock rippled through the crowd, but before anyone could respond, a low creak echoed through the ceiling. The room froze. He recognized the sound instantly, a shift in load distribution, a warning. His instincts sharpened, his body responding before his thoughts fully aligned. He scanned the ceiling panels, narrowing in on the weakest point. "Everyone move away from the center," he said, voice suddenly firm. "Now!" People hesitated, confused. Another creak, longer this time, more urgent. "Move!" he commanded. That was enough. Chairs scraped, people scrambled. Even board members flinched at the quiet authority in his tone. He darted forward, grabbing the elderly woman nearest the weakening beam and pulling her clear. The ceiling buckled, drywall cracked in a jagged line. Dust rained down. A wooden beam split, dropping a section of the ceiling where residents had been sitting seconds before. Screams erupted. Residents stumbled toward the walls. Papers flew. Lorraine ducked, covering her head, shock widening her eyes. He wasn't panicked. He surveyed the ceiling again, reading stress fractures as naturally as reading a map. "Stay against the perimeter," he instructed. "The load-bearing support here is compromised but stable enough for evacuation if you move calmly." That stability in his voice, calm in the middle of chaos, changed everything. People listened. Ezra rushed over, breathless. "How did you know that would give out?" He didn't answer directly. "Because it was inevitable," he said quietly. "Someone's been cutting corners." He didn't look at Lorraine, but everyone else did. "What do we do?" a resident shouted. "Evacuate slowly." "Toward the east exit," he said. "One line, watch your step." He guided them out, assessing movements, adjusting instructions as he went. May wasn't here, thankfully, but the thought of Iris lying in a hospital bed hardened his focus with even sharper precision. When most residents had exited, he doubled back into the room. Lorraine was still inside, paralyzed, staring at the fallen ceiling tile like it was a physical manifestation of her unraveling authority. "Why aren't you moving?" he asked. She backed away, trembling. You set this up. You must have sabotaged the ceiling." He studied her expression, fear mixed with paranoia. She was spiraling, desperately grasping for anyone to blame but herself. "If I wanted this to collapse," he said calmly, "you wouldn't still be standing here." Her breath hitched. Another groan shook the ceiling. He stepped toward her. "Come on. Standing there isn't going to help you." For a moment, pride battled survival in her eyes. Then survival won. She stumbled toward him. He took her arm, not gently, not cruelly, just firmly enough to keep her moving, and guided her out as the last panel sagged ominously behind them. Outside, the residents stared at him with a mixture of awe and shock. Someone whispered, "How did he know what to do?" Someone else murmured, "That wasn't luck." Ezra approached, expression conflicted. "What exactly were you before you worked maintenance?" he asked quietly. He didn't answer. The question wasn't for right now, but in that silence, Ezra seemed to understand something important. Something that would later matter far more than this moment. The board stood in a defeated cluster, dust on their clothes, their authority cracked just like the ceiling they had ignored. And Lorraine, shaken and pale, was no longer the unshakable figure they once feared. He turned toward home. This wasn't victory, not yet, but it was proof. The structure she built was already collapsing. And soon, the truth would finish what gravity started. He drove straight to the hospital, after leaving the damaged headquarters behind, the image of the collapsing ceiling still alive in his mind, not because it surprised him, but because it confirmed everything he had already calculated. Structures failed when built on shortcuts. Systems failed when ruled by fear. Leaders failed when convinced their power made them untouchable. And now, with the building literally cracking under the weight of Lorraine's decisions, the residents had witnessed the first undeniable truth. She wasn't protecting the community. She was endangering it. When he stepped into Iris's room, the hum of machines and the soft beep of monitors steadied something inside him. She was awake this time, her face pale but her eyes alert. The moment she saw him, a weak smile tugged at the corner of her mouth, gentle, tired, but still her. He approached quietly, careful not to jostle her, injured shoulder. "Hey," she whispered. "Hey!" He sat beside her, taking her hand. Her voice was fragile. "How bad is everything out there?" He didn't sugarcoat anything between them, never had. "It's unraveling," he said. "Faster than they expected. The building partially collapsed during the meeting." Her eyes widened. "Did anyone get hurt?" "No," he assured her. "I made sure of that." Something flickered behind her gaze. Pride, worry, maybe a little fear of the part of him she rarely saw but always respected. The part he kept contained for her, for May, for the life he built after leaving the military behind. She squeezed his fingers. "You're doing a lot, aren't you?" "Not yet," he said softly. "But it's starting." She studied him, reading the tension beneath his calm. "Just don't lose yourself," she murmured. "I know what you're capable of, but I also know what it cost you last time." He lowered his head slightly, accepting the truth in her words. He had walked through darker places than this. He had navigated systems far more corrupt. But the stakes now were personal: his family, his home, their safety. And personal wars required sharper discipline than battlefield ones. When her eyelids grew heavy, he stayed until she slept again, brushing stray hair from her forehead before stepping out of the room. In the hallway, Ezra waited. The man looked like he hadn't slept all night. Maybe he didn't. His hands wrung the edges of his jacket, and guilt weighed heavily in his posture. He began awkwardly. "I wanted to check on her. I hope that's okay." He nodded. "She'll recover." "That's good," Ezra exhaled, relief tempering his nerves. Then his voice dropped. "I came because I have to tell you something important. Something you need to know before the board takes their next step." He motioned for Ezra to continue. "They're planning to file an emergency injunction against you," Ezra confessed. "They want to restrict your access to HOA records, freeze your voting privileges, and label you a community risk. They're convinced you orchestrated the collapse." He almost laughed, not out of humor, but disbelief at how predictably desperate the board had become. "That building collapsed because they gutted structural beams to install decorative skylights," he said. "It was only a matter of time." "I know," Ezra whispered, "but they think if they move quickly enough, they can isolate you before residents start asking questions. Especially after you, saved them all." Another truth he expected: the board would rather silence him than face accountability. Ezra hesitated, then added, "I don't want to be part of this anymore. Not after what I saw yesterday. Not after the way you kept everyone calm. I've never seen someone do that." He met Ezra's gaze. "Then stop being part of it." The assessor swallowed. "I can, and I want to help you, but you need to understand. There are documents they're hiding, not just about the renovations, financials, approvals, things that would ruin the board if they ever became public. I've seen them. I didn't know what to do." Now the outline sharpened. This wasn't just about the shooting. It wasn't just about fines. It wasn't even about power. It was about the infrastructure of corruption the HOA had quietly built for years, hidden beneath signatures and stamped approvals. And now, a man inside their walls wanted out. "What do you need from me?" Ezra asked. "Tell me where the documents are," he replied. Ezra nodded slowly. "They're stored in the HOA archives downstairs, locked in a filing cabinet labeled Legacy Compliance. Only Lorraine has the key, but I know where she keeps the spare. A structural flaw, a crack in their foundation. Exactly what he needed." "Thank you," he said, and Ezra's shoulders sagged with visible relief. "One more thing," Ezra added. "You should know. They're terrified of you now, not because of what you did, but because of how calm you were during the collapse. That shook them more than anything." Good, he thought. Fear made powerful people careless. As he stepped out of the hospital into the cool evening air, he already had the next step planned. He wasn't improvising. He wasn't retaliating. He was building a precise chain of actions, each one tightening around the truth. Lorraine thought she was fighting a homeowner. She hadn't realized yet that she'd provoked a strategist, and he was just beginning. He left the hospital parking lot with a clear destination in mind. The sun had dipped low, casting long shadows across the neighborhood as he turned into Briar Ridge. The streets looked peaceful at a glance. Perfectly trimmed lawns, identical mailbox posts, neat rows of hedges. All maintained illusions of order, but underneath, everything was fracturing. Residents whispered now, questioned decisions, replayed the collapse in their minds. And most importantly, they were starting to wonder who held the real authority here, the board, or the man who'd saved them when the ceiling gave way. He parked a block away from the HOA headquarters. The building, cordoned off with flimsy caution tape, sagged visibly in places. Engineers would confirm instability within hours. The board likely knew that too, which meant panic would drive their next decisions. He needed to move before they realized just how much evidence the collapse exposed. Ezra said the hidden documents were downstairs, locked in the archives. He knew he couldn't simply break in. The board would twist any sign of forced entry. But he didn't need to. He'd never relied on brute force. He relied on precision. He walked around the side of the building, where emergency lights glowed faintly through dusty windows. The maintenance door hung crookedly on its hinges from the collapse, but it remained locked at the handle. He crouched and inspected the frame. The metal was bowed out just slightly, not from sabotage, but from foundation shifting. Still secure, still alarmed. But the alarm wire had been fed through an external conduit. Poor design. Easy to bypass. He reached into his pocket for a small tool, an old multi-purpose device he hadn't used in years, but kept anyway because habits from his former life never fully disappeared. A gentle twist, a quick disconnect, and the line severed without triggering the siren inside. He eased the door open just wide enough to slip through. Inside smelled of dust, drywall, and stale recirculated air. He moved quietly, stepping over debris, scanning for weak points in the floor. The structural damage meant the lower levels weren't just risky, they were unpredictable. But he'd assessed unstable infrastructures before. This was nothing compared to sites overseas. The stairs to the archives had a noticeable slope. The railing pulled slightly from the wall on one end. He descended slowly, listening for sounds, creaking, shifting, footsteps. Nothing. The lower hallway was intact, untouched by the collapse above. Ezra was right. The cabinet was labeled Legacy Compliance, tucked behind a stack of binders, unassuming, strategically plain, meant to hide in plain sight. He checked the drawer, locked. He reached for the shelf above it, sliding his fingers along the underside until they found a piece of tape, the spare key. Ezra hadn't betrayed him. Not yet. The key clicked softly. When he pulled the drawer open, he found neatly organized folders, financial statements, renovation approvals, architectural plans, contractor invoices, email printouts, years of decisions no homeowner ever saw. He flipped through quickly, scanning patterns. Misappropriated funds disguised as community beautification, unauthorized structural changes rubber-stamped with forged signatures, safety violations hidden beneath altered inspection dates. And worst, documents showing Lorraine had been warned twice about the load-bearing risks in the headquarters, but ignored them for aesthetic upgrades. This wasn't negligence. This was arrogance built into paperwork. He took out his phone and photographed everything, page by page, careful not to disturb the order. The truth didn't need embellishment. It only needed to be visible. Footsteps echoed faintly above. He froze, listening. A door creaked. Voices. The board. They were here. He closed the cabinet gently, returned the key exactly where he found it, and stepped back into the shadows. He didn't panic. Panic killed precision. Panic created noise. He simply calculated. He moved toward the secondary exit at the far end of the hall, a service entry used by contractors. The overhead light flickered from the stress on the electrical lines. He pressed his palm against the door. Cool metal. Locked. But this lock wasn't alarmed. He worked it, opened silently. Just as he slipped outside, he heard Claudia's voice drifting down the stairwell. She said the documents need to be moved tonight. The collapse gives us cover. No one will question missing records. He stepped into the alley behind the building and exhaled, not from fear, but from confirmation. They were already trying to destroy evidence. Good. That meant he had beaten them to it. He walked the long way back to the car, staying in the darker paths between houses. His phone buzzed as he reached the curb. A text from Iris's sister. "May is asking for you. She's been anxious since the news clips aired," he typed back. "On my way." He didn't want May seeing the panic around the collapse or hearing rumors twisted into fear. She'd already seen too much for her age. But he also knew something else. Children sense tension better than adults. She could tell something was shifting. When he arrived to pick her up, she ran straight into his arms, clutching him tightly. He knelt, holding her until her breathing slowed. "Mom will be okay," he whispered, "and I will make sure everything gets fixed, all of it." Her small hand tightened on his shirt. "Promise?" "Promise." He carried her to the car, buckled her in, then sat in the driver's seat with his phone open to the photos he had taken. The evidence glowed on the screen. Lines, signatures, dates, lies carefully constructed. And now, carefully dismantled. This was the turning point. The moment when strategy shifted from gathering truth to preparing its release. Phase 1 of the victory strategy, precision and exposure, was complete, and the board had no idea how far behind they already were. He drove home slowly, May drifting asleep in the back seat, her small form rising and falling with each breath. The neighborhood was quiet again, deceptively peaceful beneath its manicured order. Only he knew how much rot hid underneath the symmetry. Only he carried the evidence of years of deceit in his phone. And only he understood the angle of attack that would dismantle everything Lorraine had built. Not with rage, not with chaos. With exposure, clean, undeniable, devastating exposure. He parked in the driveway, careful not to wake May, then carried her inside and laid her gently in her bed. Her fingers clung to his for a moment before settling. The trust in that tiny gesture hardened his resolve more than any document or broken ceiling ever could. This wasn't about revenge. This was about ensuring she grew up in a place where fear didn't dictate truth. When he stepped into the living room, he spread the photos across his laptop screen. Each document a piece of the architecture the HOA had constructed to protect themselves. He began organizing them into categories: forged approvals, financial inconsistencies, ignored safety reports. Patterns emerged quickly. Someone with access had been altering approval codes and backdating forms. Some were even in Lorraine's handwriting. Others were typed signatures of contractors he recognized, and a few he didn't. Ezra had been right. This wasn't small corruption. This was systemic. He leaned back, exhaling slowly. The strategy was shifting now. He had the facts. What he needed next was something far more valuable than proof: timing. The HOA board would panic when they realized the documents were missing or compromised. They'd scramble, make mistakes, and expose the weakest points in their own defenses. If he released the evidence too early, they would spin it. Too late, and they might destroy what he hadn't found yet. The moment had to be calculated with the same precision he used when assessing unstable structures. His phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Now." Back gate of Briar Ridge. Ezra? He grabbed his coat quietly and stepped outside. The night air was sharp, still carrying the faint chemical dust smell from the collapsed headquarters. He walked through the dim paths toward the rear gate where few residents ever passed. A figure waited by the maintenance shed, hands shoved deep in his pockets, posture tense. Ezra stepped forward as soon as he arrived. "They know," he whispered. "They know someone accessed the archives." He didn't startle. "How?" The key was moved. Ezra's voice shook. "And Lorraine noticed?" He studied him carefully. "Did she accuse you?" "She didn't say it, but she knows it wasn't a stranger. She's calling an emergency board session tonight. They're planning something big." Ezra dragged a hand down his face. "She said she's done playing nice. I don't know what that means, but when she says things like that, people get hurt." He waited. Ezra wasn't finished. "They want to remove you from the community entirely," Ezra said. "Cite you as a threat to stability. They're preparing a vote. And if they win, they'll petition for a court order restricting your access until the investigation ends." Restricting access, meaning he wouldn't be able to reach Iris without jumping through legal barriers, meaning they'd weaponize the same system he was exposing. They're cornered, he said. Cornered people rush. Rushed people make mistakes. Ezra looked torn between fear and awe. You're not afraid at all, are you? No, he said simply. Because fear clouds judgment. Ezra hesitated before adding, There's more. They're planning to remove the rest of the documents tonight, destroy them. He expected that. Do they know which documents matter? He asked. No, Ezra said, but they know something is missing. They'll panic and sweep everything. Good, he murmured. Ezra blinked. Good? He nodded. People reveal themselves under pressure. If they're desperate enough to destroy evidence, they'll make calls, bring in help, leave traces, and every trace leads somewhere. Ezra exhaled shakily. You're treating this like a battlefield strategy. He didn't deny it. Truth works the same in any environment. Ezra stepped closer. Then tell me what to do. This was the opening he'd been waiting for. Record everything, he said. Meetings, conversations, instructions to remove documents. If they panic, someone will slip. Someone always slips. Ezra nodded slowly, understanding. I can do that. And one more thing, he added. Tell me where they store digital backups. Ezra's eyes widened. You're going after those too? They're already going after me, he said. I'm just keeping balance. Ezra swallowed hard, then whispered, The server is in the upper office behind the boardroom. Lorraine has the access card, but I know her override code. Perfect. The final piece of the exposure plan was in place. Ezra stepped back, a subtle shift in his shoulders. Relief, maybe purpose. You know, he said quietly, I thought you were just a quiet guy trying to keep his head down. I didn't realize you were this. He didn't answer. Ezra didn't need to know who he used to be, only who he was now. As Ezra left, he stayed in the shadows of the back gate, watching the neighborhood glow through streetlights, watching the houses that believed themselves safe behind rules and regulations, watching the empire Lorraine built tremble. This was the pivot point, where strategy moved from gathering evidence to orchestrating the exposure that would break the board apart. In a few hours, their panic would begin, and by dawn, their lies would have nowhere left to hide. He stayed near the back gate long after Ezra disappeared into the dark, listening to the quiet hum of Briar Ridge settling into sleep. The manicured stillness no longer felt peaceful. It felt staged, manufactured. A veneer stretched thin over a community about to learn it had been governed by fear disguised as order. He walked home with steady steps, aware that tonight was the final calm before everything shifted. Exposure wasn't a single moment. It was a sequence, measured, timed, built on pressure until the truth could no longer be contained. Inside, the house was dim except for the small nightlight outside May's room. He checked on her first. She slept curled around her stuffed fox, unaware of how close her world had come to fracturing. He brushed her hair back gently, then closed the door halfway and returned to the living room. He laid out his notes, the photos, the structural diagrams, the forged approvals. He arranged them like blueprints, not of a building, but of a collapse he was about to orchestrate. This wasn't retaliation. It wasn't emotional. It was architecture. Exposing the HOA wouldn't be a shout or a confrontation. It would be a controlled detonation. Their own signatures, their own lies, their own negligence turning inward until they couldn't escape the truth. His phone buzzed with a new message, this time from a number he did recognize. One of the residents he'd helped during the collapse. People are talking. They want answers. We want to help. Tell us what to do. He didn't reply, not yet. The community wasn't ready to act without facts, but their doubt, finally awakened, was fuel. When the facts surfaced, their voices would carry farther than anything he could say alone. He shut off the screen and focused on the next step, the digital backups. Ezra's information was precise. The server hosting all HOA records was kept in the upper office behind the boardroom, a room accessible only with a card and code. Lorraine believed security was control. She never understood that security was only as strong as the people who maintained it, and he knew systems, both digital and physical, failed under pressure. He waited until midnight before moving. May slept soundly, and he left a note on the kitchen counter in case she woke early. Then he drove silently toward the headquarters. Yellow caution tape fluttered weakly around the entrance, but otherwise the building was dark. He slipped through the same maintenance door as before, stepping over splintered drywall. The air inside held a faint metallic scent from fractured beams. He moved carefully, reading the structure with every footstep. The building groaned occasionally, settling under stress, but it held. He'd calculated it would, at least for one more night. The stairwell to the upper office was intact. Once he reached the landing, he pressed his ear to the boardroom door. Silence. Good? He keyed in the override code Ezra whispered earlier. The lock clicked. Inside, the underlit room looked exactly as it had during the meeting, except now it felt like the aftermath of a collapsed regime. Chairs knocked askew, papers scattered, a projector screen still hanging crookedly from the sudden evacuation. He moved through without touching anything and slipped into the private office behind it. The server hummed quietly in its cabinet. He opened the panel. Digital records weren't as vulnerable as paper. They didn't burn or tear, but they did carry metadata, timestamps, IP logs, file history, every forged signature, every altered document, every dishonest approval. And Lorraine had no idea how much she had preserved by relying on technology she barely understood. He connected his portable drive and executed a mirrored backup. The files copied rapidly, line by line, crawling across the screen. It was more than he expected. Emails, scanned documents, audit logs, meeting recordings. One folder made him pause. Archived security. Footage restricted. He clicked it. Multiple video files, all date stamped, all labeled by location. His eyes narrowed when he found one with the date matching the night of the shooting. Another angle, one the police didn't mention. Likely one Lorraine hadn't handed over. He clicked it open. The footage showed Lorraine approaching his porch, not cautiously, not neutrally, but already agitated. Her hand rested on her firearm before Iris even stepped outside. The moment Iris appeared, Lorraine's posture stiffened. A second later, the gun flashed. He leaned back, breath steady. This wasn't panic. This was escalation. This was an ambush. He copied the file. As he worked, he felt the building shift slightly, a reminder that time was limited. He finished the backup, disconnected the drive, and replaced everything exactly as he found it. No forced entries, no missing equipment, no signs of tampering. Truth didn't need dramatics. It needed accuracy. On his way down the stairs, he paused at the landing. The night outside was still. The headquarters, once the symbol of Lorraine's control, now felt like a relic waiting for inevitable collapse. He stepped outside and locked the door quietly behind him. When he reached his car, he glanced once more at the building. Tomorrow, he would begin the final phase of exposure. Not a confrontation, a release. The truth, delivered in full, undeniable, irreversible form. As he started the engine, he murmured to himself, not a vow, but an observation. They built their power on paper. I built my case on facts. The difference would decide everything. He drove home with the portable drive resting in the cup holder like it was made of glass. Not because it was fragile, but because it contained everything the board feared, everything they pretended didn't exist. Everything they believed they'd buried beneath authority and intimidation. When he pulled into the driveway, the house was quiet, still anchored by the soft glow of May's nightlight through the hallway. He checked on her first, ensuring she slept undisturbed, then went to the kitchen and placed the drive gently on the table. It didn't look like much, but it was decisive, clean, precise. The first lever in a collapse engineered, not emotional. He opened his laptop and began sorting the digital evidence into a structured timeline. Folders for altered signatures, folders for illegal modifications, one entire folder for suppressed safety warnings about the headquarters, and then the crown jewel, the hidden camera angle showing the ambush. Lorraine's hand already on her weapon, her posture set, her escalation unmistakable. When viewed in sequence with the altered reports she later filed, the pattern became damning. Not a confused reaction, not a tragic accident, a reckless, unjustifiable abuse of power. He was deep in the architecture of the evidence when a faint vibration shook the table. His phone buzzed, another message, this time from a resident he barely knew. People are taking sides. The board is pushing a new story. You need to speak soon. He typed back a short reply. Not yet. Timing matters. He needed one more movement from the board before releasing anything. One more misstep to reveal the weakest pillar in their foundation. He leaned back, stretching his shoulders when the security light outside flicked on. Instinct sharpened instantly. He stood quietly and moved to the window. A figure stood at the corner of his lawn, still watching the house. Not a resident. Tall, hood pulled low. Not the police either. Someone waiting. Someone sent. He didn't turn on any lights. He stayed in the shadows, assessing posture, weight distribution, stance. The figure wasn't approaching, just observing. A scout, not an attacker. Someone testing boundaries. After a minute, the figure walked away, disappearing behind the hedges. He returned to the table, breath controlled. This wasn't the board themselves. This was someone they'd hired, someone they believed could intimidate him into silence. They didn't realize intimidation only sharpened his focus. He transferred the video to a separate encrypted drive, then stored both in different places, one in his jacket pocket, the other hidden beneath the floorboard panel near the pantry. Redundancy was essential. He didn't trust convenience. He trusted preparation. By morning, the neighborhood felt tense. Conversations paused as he walked by. People recognized him now, not as a quiet maintenance worker, but as the man who had guided them out of a collapsing ceiling. Respect mixed with uncertainty and curiosity. Rumors outpaced truth in places like Briar Ridge, and today, whispers followed him to the HOA headquarters. Not that he planned to go inside. He stood across the street, watching. A cleanup crew had arrived, likely called by the board to make the collapse appear superficial. They were loading debris into dumpsters, removing visible signs of instability, erasing clues. But structural damage wasn't erased with a broom, and the city inspectors would see that soon enough. Ezra spotted him from the sidewalk and broke away from the cleanup group, walking over quickly. "They're meeting again," he said, lowering his voice. "Behind locked doors. Lorraine's furious. She's blaming everyone. Me, the board, the residents. She keeps saying you're staging an attack." He almost smiled at the irony. "What are they planning now?" Ezra hesitated. "A vote. A community-wide notice calling you a threat, saying your behavior is destabilizing the neighborhood." "That won't hold." "I know," Ezra said, "but they're hoping it scares people into silence." He studied him for a moment. Ezra was nervous, yes, but he was no longer afraid of the truth. Something had shifted in him after the collapse. Seeing the building fail had forced him to confront his own role. And now, he stood here asking what came next. "You want to help?" he asked quietly. Ezra nodded. "Tell me how." "Record their meeting," he said. "Capture every threat, every plan to remove evidence, every attempt to fake compliance. They'll incriminate themselves if they think no one is listening." Ezra swallowed. "All right, I'll do it. And avoid being seen with me," he added. "If they suspect you, they'll corner you before you can get anything meaningful." Ezra looked conflicted, but nodded again, stepping back. "One more thing," he whispered. "Lorraine said she's preparing an official statement for tonight, a public one." Perfect. He needed her to speak publicly, to anchor her lies on record. A public lie carried more weight and exposure. The higher the pedestal, the farther the fall. As Ezra returned to the building, he turned toward home, already outlining the next phase in his mind. Not a confrontation, not a leak. A coordinated release, evidence timed to coincide with the board's statement. Their lies positioned next to undeniable truth. Truth didn't need theatrics, it needed timing. He would give them that. That evening, the sky grew heavy with storm clouds, a slow rumble rolling across the horizon like distant machinery. He sat at the table again, May drawing quietly beside him, unaware of the storm brewing outside and inside the neighborhood. His phone buzzed at 8:14 p.m. "Ezra, she's about to speak." They locked the doors. "I'm inside, recording everything." He typed back, "Do not intervene, just record." May nudged his arm then, showing him a drawing of their family holding hands. "Mom can add her picture when she's home," she said softly. He smiled, genuine, warm, grounding, and kissed her forehead. Then he picked up the encrypted drive, slipped it into his jacket, and stepped outside as the first drops of rain hit the pavement. Tonight wasn't the end. Tonight was the ignition point. Rain slicked the pavement as he stepped into the night, the storm gathering force overhead. The air felt charged, not just with electricity, but with anticipation. This was the moment everything had been building toward, not revenge, not retaliation. Exposure. Truth had a weight of its own, and tonight he would let it fall exactly where it needed to. He walked toward the HOA headquarters, its silhouette looming like a wounded monument. Light pulsed from inside, unnatural for this hour. They were preparing their statement, unaware that the walls around them were already rotting with incriminating evidence. He kept to the shadows along the tree line until he found a vantage point near the side entrance. From here, he could see silhouettes in the boardroom, figures pacing, gesturing, arguing. His phone buzzed again. Ezra, she's rehearsing, voice raised. She's blaming you for everything, even the collapse. They've drafted a removal petition. I'm recording. He typed, stay calm, keep the phone steady, get everything. A stronger gust of wind pushed Rain sideways, tapping against his jacket. He didn't move, didn't flinch. He waited, listening to the rhythm of the storm, letting it sync with his breath. Patience, timing, precision. He'd been trained to act in those gaps when chaos aligned perfectly with opportunity. Inside, Lorraine's voice sharpened, rising above the others. Even through the walls, he recognized her cadence, controlled, manipulative, frantic at the edges. She was unraveling. Good. Panic made arrogant people predictable. The door opened abruptly. A board member rushed out into the rain, muttering curses, phone pressed to his ear. The man didn't see him hidden in the dark. He listened. I don't care what the inspector says, the board member snapped. We can fix it before they come back. Just remove the south beam debris and, yes, hide the rest. Put it in the dumpster behind the clubhouse. No one will check. They're panicking over him, not the building. He strode off quickly, heading toward the back lot. Evidence destruction, recorded by Ezra, and now overheard firsthand. Perfect. He waited until the man was gone before moving closer. The boardroom blinds were half open, letting him see enough to assess the scene. Lorraine stood at the center, face flushed, hair pulled tightly back, pacing as she rehearsed lines off a sheet. Claudia sat rigidly, nodding at every phrase. Ortiz whispered anxiously, eyes darting. Then Lorraine slammed the paper down. He thinks he can threaten me, she hissed. He thinks he can twist the community against me. I run this place. I protect these people. And they will believe me before they ever believe a maintenance worker. He didn't react, not to the insult, not to the arrogance. He waited. He doesn't understand, she continued, voice trembling with a cocktail of fear and ego. I built this neighborhood. I built this board. He doesn't get to take it from me. If the ceiling collapsed, blame the contractor. If his wife got hurt, blame her for charging at me. Ortiz flinched. Claudia stayed silent. And Ezra, unseen behind a row of filing cabinets, recorded every word. The storm intensified, lightning illuminating the scene for a split second. He turned away from the window. He had what he needed from the outside. Now he needed to position the truth where it couldn't be ignored. He walked to his truck, opened the back compartment, and pulled out a waterproof case. Inside sat a small portable projector and speaker system he used for maintenance training. Tonight, he would repurpose it. Not theatrically, strategically. He set it up across from the headquarters, angled toward the giant blank wall the board used for announcements during community events. The rain softened to a drizzle, as if giving him a clear moment to work. He powered the projector, connected the encrypted drive, queued the files, but kept the screen black for now. Ezra texted again. They're about to start the broadcast. She wants the community outside in 10 minutes. They think they're controlling the narrative. Good, he replied. When they gather, step outside with everyone else. Do not draw attention. When I signal, send me the audio from inside. He pocketed the phone just as residents began emerging from their homes, umbrellas in hand, gathering near the headquarters. Some looked tired, others angry, many confused. The collapse, the rumors, the fines. It had all built to this moment. Lorraine stepped onto the front steps, microphone in hand, raincoat draped over her shoulders like a cape. She smiled, tight, confident, hollow. Residents of Briar Ridge, she began, I stand before you tonight with a heavy heart. Our community has faced unprecedented challenges, and I, your president, have fought tirelessly to ensure your safety. The hypocrisy tasted sour in the air. He waited until the crowd's attention locked onto her. Then he tapped his phone twice. Ezra sent the recording instantly. He patched it through the projector. The giant wall behind her lit up, first with the HOA's own security timestamp, then with her voice, clear and sharp. I run this place, I protect these people, and they will believe me before they ever believe a maintenance worker. The crowd whipped around. Gasps, murmurs, shock. Lorraine froze. Turn that off! Turn that off! He stepped forward now, calm, controlled, unstoppable. He didn't shout. He didn't grandstand. He simply pressed play on the next file, her voice again. If the ceiling collapsed, blame the contractor. If his wife got hurt, blame her for charging at me. Residents stared at her, betrayal spreading like wildfire. And then, the final blow. The hidden camera footage, the ambush, the gun drawn early, the shot, the truth, projected across the wall for everyone to see. Lorraine staggered back, horror overtaking arrogance. The board recoiled. Several residents shouted. One woman cried out in disbelief. He didn't move, didn't speak, didn't break eye contact with Lorraine. He didn't need to. The truth was speaking loudly enough. For a moment, nothing moved. The storm, the crowd, even the building behind Lorraine seemed to hold its breath. She stood frozen on the steps, the projector's glow washing her face in stark, merciless light. Her authority, once absolute, cracked openly in front of hundreds of residents. The hidden footage played again in the stunned silence, each frame dissolving one layer of her constructed power. Then, the crowd reacted. A wave of voices surged forward. Outrage, betrayal, disbelief, fear. Some shouted her name. Others demanded answers. A few reached for their phones, recording everything. The board behind her scrambled backward, whispering frantically, trying to shield themselves from the fallout they helped create. He didn't move from where he stood in the rain. He didn't have to. Everything he'd assembled, every timestamp, every forged approval, every step of their negligence, had aligned perfectly. And now, the collapse was happening exactly as engineered, inward, structural, unavoidable. Lorraine tried to speak, forcing a smile that trembled under the weight of the truth. This is taken out of context. This is edited. He's trying to destroy. The crowd erupted louder, drowning her out. He raised a single hand, not commanding, just steady. The noise lowered instinctively. Not because he demanded it, but because after everything they'd seen, people trusted the one who had saved them, not the one who had endangered them. He pressed play again. This time, the projector displayed the digital audit logs, unaltered timestamps proving document manipulation, safety warnings ignored, signatures forged. He let the evidence speak. He let the truth breathe. A man near the front shouted, "You put our lives at risk." A woman sobbed, "My kids were in that building. You lied." Ortiz backed away slowly, hands raised. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." But Claudia whispered, defeated, "She made us sign everything." Lorraine snapped, "Claudia, don't you dare." The projector cut to the footage of the ceiling collapse, the exact angle revealing the ignored structural warnings that should have saved them. Gasps echoed through the crowd. Ezra stepped forward timidly then, moving to stand near him, not as a conspirator, but as someone who had chosen the right moment to stop being silent. The crowd saw him too, saw the fear leaving him, saw the truth settle into his shoulders. Lorraine noticed and pointed, shaking with fury. You betrayed your board." Ezra didn't flinch. "You betrayed this entire neighborhood." The pause that followed hit harder than the footage. It was over for her. Sirens broke the tension a minute later. 3 patrol cars pulling up fast. The officers stepped out, hands ready but not drawn, scanning the chaotic scene. One recognized him from the night of the shooting and went straight to him. "Sir," the officer said, "we need to confirm. Did you supply this footage?" "Yes," he answered calmly, "and it's untouched. All evidence is here." The officer nodded once, firm and respectful, then turned to his partner. "Take statements. She needs to be detained." Lorraine recoiled. "You can't arrest me. I'm the HOA president." "That's not a legal position," the officer said dryly. "And even if it were, it wouldn't protect you from firing a weapon at an unarmed woman. Residents parted as they approached her. She backed away, soaked, shaking, pointing wildly at him. "He did this! He planned this! He's manipulating all of you! He—" But her voice finally cracked. Not with anger, with fear. She was escorted to the patrol car, still shouting, still trying to salvage her unraveling authority. The board members were separated for questioning. Residents clustered together, whispering fiercely, relief and shock mingling in the air. He shut off the projector and packed it away quietly. Lightning flickered again, but the storm had softened, its threat spent. May was waiting at home. His priority hadn't changed. Protect her, protect their home, protect the truth. Ezra approached, him once the officers cleared the crowd. "What happens now?" "Investigation, reconstruction, elections," he said. "The community will rebuild with transparency." "And you?" Ezra asked. He didn't answer immediately. He looked at the headquarters, the symbol of the board's control, now surrounded by residents and officers, its authority drained away. "I won't lead," he said eventually, "but I will help them rebuild, not as someone in charge, just as someone who understands where the structure failed." Ezra nodded slowly. "People are going to see you differently now." He gave a small, tired smile. "That's their choice. I'll keep doing what I always do." "Which is? Fix what's broken." By the time he walked home, the projector case in hand, the rain had eased to a mist. May waited at the doorway, sleepy-eyed, clutching her fox plush. When she saw him, she ran into his arms. He held her tight, grounding himself in the only thing that ever mattered. Justice wasn't loud, it wasn't theatrical. It was steady, deliberate, and complete. He carried May inside and shut the door gently behind them. The storm was finally over. Subscribe and don't miss our next story. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?